Parents are skipping my wedding to defend my adopted brother who denies we're family, so I'm choosing my own happiness. I'm a 32-year-old man, and I'm getting married to my longtime girlfriend soon. What should be one of the happiest moments of my life has turned into a heartbreaking ordeal because of a deepening rift in my family. To give you some background, I'm my parents' biological son, and when I was 12, they adopted two boys who were biological siblings, Jack, who was 8, and Liam, who was 5. From the very beginning, it was clear that things were going to be tough. Jack came with severe behavioral issues due to some intense trauma. I'll spare the details, but it was significant. I tried my hardest to be understanding, but living with him was nothing short of exhausting. His outbursts were constant, and I often felt like I was walking on eggshells, terrified of setting him off. As we grew older, I continued to try to be there for Jack, despite everything. A few years ago, Jack fell into a devastating drug addiction. I stood by him through his darkest moments, supporting him through rehab, and doing everything I could to help him get back on his feet. It was draining and heartbreaking, but I did it because I loved him and believed that, despite our challenges, we were still brothers. The situation came to a head recently at a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My son was working on his summer homework, which involved creating a family tree. He innocently asked Jack if he wanted to be included, and Jack just flat out said no. He didn't want to be part of it because, in his exact words, we're not real brothers. He said it so casually, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, with no regard for how much it would cut me to the core. I was utterly stunned, but what shattered me even more was that Liam, who I've always felt closer to, just sat there in silence. He didn't say a word, he didn't defend me or even acknowledge how hurtful Jack's words were. He just let it happen. I've tried so hard to be supportive of both of them, especially Jack, despite the endless challenges. So, for Jack to say that, and for Liam to do nothing, felt like a gut punch. It was as if they were both telling me that I was never truly part of their family. I decided to uninvite both Jack and Liam for my wedding. My fiancé has been nothing but supportive of my decision, but my parents are furious. They've made it clear that if Jack and Liam aren't invited, they won't attend either. It feels like history is repeating itself, with my parents once again prioritizing Jack over me, no matter how much it hurts me. I'm absolutely heartbroken that my parents would choose to miss my wedding rather than support me in this. I know Jack has been through a lot, but I've done everything I can to be there for him and for Liam, despite all the heartache. And now, I feel like I'm the one being punished for finally standing up for myself and setting some boundaries. Update 1. After hearing from so many of you, I decided I needed to talk to Liam. We met up at a pub, and I just laid it all out there, how hurt I was when he didn't say anything after Jack made that awful comment about not being real brothers. I was half expecting him to defend himself, but what I got was something entirely different. Liam confessed that he's been living in fear of Jack for years. He told me he kept quiet that night because he was terrified of setting Jack off, not because he agreed with him. Then he dropped a bombshell. Despite being Jack's biological brother, he's felt just as much of an outsider in our family as I have. The constant pressure from our parents to cater to Jack's every whim has worn him down, too. Liam assured me that he's always seen me as his brother and that he regrets not standing up for me sooner. Hearing that was a huge relief. He's completely on my side now, and we agreed that if Jack can't respect me as a brother, he has no place at my wedding, or in our lives. But just when I thought things couldn't get more intense, my parents decided to make everything worse. I sat them down and explained why I uninvited Jack, hoping they'd understand. Instead, they threw down an ultimatum. If Jack isn't invited, they're not coming to my wedding. No room for discussion, no empathy, just flat-out refusal. I was gutted. After all these years of putting Jack's needs above mine, this is how they repay me? I couldn't hold back anymore. I let out all the anger and frustration I've been bottling up for years. I told them how I've always been the one sacrificing, how they've always prioritized Jack, and that I was done being treated like I don't matter. I made it clear that if they choose not to come to my wedding, they're making their choice, and I'll make mine. With that, I walked out, leaving them to stew in their own decisions. Out of nowhere, Jack started bombarding me with the nastiest, most hurtful texts I've ever received. He accused me of turning Liam against him, of ripping the family apart, and had the audacity to call me selfish for abandoning him. He ranted about how he never felt like he belonged in the family and how it's all my fault for pushing him away. His words hit hard, but they also opened my eyes. Jack has spent his whole life blaming everyone else for his problems, and I've been his favorite scapegoat. This time, though, I'm not letting him guilt trip me. I didn't even respond, I just blocked his number. If he can't see what he's done wrong, then there's nothing more to say. Liam was livid when I told him about Jack's messages. He's more determined than ever to support me, and we've decided to go low contact with our parents until after the wedding. Liam's been a rock through all this, helping me with the wedding plans and making sure I'm not dealing with this mess alone. So, the wedding is still happening, but with a much smaller guest list. My parents haven't reached out since our argument, and at this point, I don't care if they show up or not. This day is about me and my fiancé, and I'm not letting anyone, not even my own family, ruin it. Update 2. A lot has changed, and I'm grateful to say that things are moving in a much better direction. 2 days after the text argument with Jack, he reached out to me. I wasn't sure what to expect when he asked if we could meet up, and I was reluctant, but I agreed. When we sat down, the first thing he did was apologize. He told me how sorry he was for what he said to my son and admitted that he didn't know why he said it. Jack seemed genuinely remorseful, and I could tell that he really meant it. This wasn't just another apology to smooth things over, this was different, and it felt sincere. After apologizing, Jack took a deep breath and confessed something that I probably should have seen coming. He told me that he had relapsed before the argument even happened. Hearing that hit me hard. It explained so much about his behavior in the weeks leading up to that moment, the irritability, the distance, the way he was withdrawing from everyone. I realized that I had missed all the signs. I'm not proud to admit it, but I was so caught up in my frustrations with Jack's behaviors and my wedding that I didn't stop to think that something deeper might be going on. Jack's confession wasn't just about the relapse, it was about taking responsibility in a way he's never done before. He went on to tell me that after realizing the damage he'd caused, he had made the decision to check himself into treatment. This might sound like a typical step, but for Jack, it was monumental. In the past, Jack's only gone into treatment because he was either sectioned by social services and forced into it, or because my parents threatened to kick him out if he didn't get help. But this time, he made the decision on his own. That was something he'd never done before, and it showed me that he was serious about wanting to change. He told me that he is doing this because the prospects of losing me, his brother, was too much and he couldn't handle it. He wants to take this seriously because he wants to show me he can do it. He told me he sees me as his family, and he feels so guilty for making me feel like I wasn't his family. Jack has also agreed to start taking medication to help calm his nerves, something he would never do before. It's now been about 5-6 days since Jack checked himself in for treatment, and I've been visiting him regularly. At first, I went alone because I wasn't sure how my son would feel about seeing Jack so soon after everything that happened. But after a few visits, I felt it was important for my son to see that Jack was making an effort to make things right. So, I brought him along, and Jack took the opportunity to apologize to him directly. It was a really emotional moment for me as a parent. My son is still young and doesn't fully understand everything that's been going on, but he could see that Jack was sorry, and that seemed to make a difference to him. They even spent some time together, just talking and playing, and it felt like a big step forward for all of us. Throughout all of this, my brother Liam has been incredibly supportive. We've talked a lot about Jack, and it's clear that Liam wants to see him succeed just as much as I do. We both know how much Jack's trauma has affected him, and while it doesn't excuse his behavior, it does help us understand why he's struggled so much. Having Liam by my side through all of this has made me feel a lot less alone. Reflecting on everything, I've come to realize that I need to take responsibility for my part in how things escalated. In the weeks leading up to the argument, Jack had been doing things that really got under my skin. Instead of addressing it calmly, I let my frustration build until I finally snapped. Looking back, I can see that his behaviors were likely tied to his relapse, and I should have seen that sooner. I feel guilty for not recognizing the signs and for reacting the way I did, but I'm trying to focus on what I can do to support Jack now that he's taking his recovery seriously. When I wrote my first 2 posts, I was in a place of deep frustration with Jack, and though nothing I said was incorrect or a lie, I definitely painted a picture of Jack's most negative moments without everything else. I want to remind everyone about Jack's trauma. Jack was a victim of severe abuse by his biological family, including extensive CSA, Liam also, but Jack's was a lot more intense. Jack jokes now that he was their biological father's favorite in all the wrong ways. Jack got into drugs at a pretty young age, but has been clean, or so I thought, for a while. I mentioned this before, but Jack has told me in the past that even now, almost 20 years after he was adopted by our parents, there is not a day where he doesn't think/have nightmares about his abuse. He says the only moments of peace he gets is when he's high. Jack's trauma runs deep, and it's something that continues to affect him every day. I'm not making excuses for his actions, but I do think it's important to remember that he's dealing with a lot of pain. Despite everything, I still believe in Jack. I believe that he has the strength to overcome his past, and with Liam and me by his side, I'm hopeful that he can get through this. I also want to take a moment to thank everyone who offered advice and support on my last post. Your words helped me see things from a different perspective and gave me the push I needed to approach this situation with more compassion. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm optimistic that we're on the right path now. For now, things are looking up. Jack is taking his treatment seriously, and our family is slowly healing. We're taking things one day at a time, and I'm committed to supporting Jack as long as he's committed to helping himself. Update 3. It's been about 2 months since my last update, and I can hardly believe how much has changed in our lives. The wedding went ahead as planned last month, and despite all the drama leading up to it, it turned out to be everything my wife and I had hoped for. Jack completed his 30-day treatment program and has been clean since then. I'm cautiously optimistic, but this time feels different. He's attending NA meetings 3 times a week without anyone having to push him, and he's actually opened up about his trauma to a therapist who specializes in childhood abuse. He told me that for the first time in his life, he feels like he might be able to process what happened to him without turning to substances to numb the pain. The biggest surprise came 2 weeks before the wedding when my parents showed up at our door unannounced. My first instinct was to shut the door in their faces, but something in my mother's expression stopped me. They asked if they could come in, and once seated, my father did something I've never seen him do before. He broke down in tears. He apologized for always putting Jack's needs above mine, admitting that they had been terrified of failing Jack because of his traumatic past, and in doing so, they had failed me instead. My mother joined in, saying they had spent weeks reflecting on their behavior after our argument and realized how unfair they'd been to me throughout my life. They asked if they could still attend the wedding, promising to respect my boundaries going forward. I was skeptical at first. After all, I've heard empty promises from them before. But Liam, who had been spending a lot of time at our place helping with wedding preparations, vouched for them. He said they'd been having long conversations with him too, really listening for the first time about how their hyperfocus on Jack had affected him as well. After thinking it over, I decided to give them another chance. At the wedding, my father's toast nearly had everyone in tears. He spoke about how proud he was of me, not just for the man I've become, but for having the courage to stand up for myself when they couldn't see past their own fears. It was the validation I'd been waiting for my entire life. Jack was there too, looking healthier than I've seen him in years. He stayed sober throughout the reception and even bonded with my son, who was ecstatic to include him in the updated family tree he'd brought to show everyone. There was a moment when I caught Jack looking at it, tracing his finger over the line connecting him to me, and I could see the emotion in his eyes. After the honeymoon, Jack asked if he could move in with us temporarily while he gets back on his feet. My initial reaction was hesitation. I've been down this road before with him. But my wife, who has been incredibly understanding through all of this, suggested we set up clear boundaries. He needs to stay in treatment, contribute to the household, and most importantly, maintain his sobriety. To my surprise, Jack not only agreed but suggested we add regular drug testing to the conditions, saying he wanted to prove to himself as much as to us that he's committed. It's been 3 weeks since he moved into our spare room, and so far, he's kept his word. He found a part-time job at a local garage and has been going to therapy twice a week. Yesterday, I came home to find him helping my son with his math homework, something so normal and yet so significant given our history. Liam has been thriving too. With the family dynamics shifting, he's finally found his voice and has been setting his own boundaries with our parents. They've been respecting these boundaries, which has been healing for everyone involved. I know we're not out of the woods yet. Jack's recovery is a day-by-day process, and there will likely be setbacks along the way. My parents still have decades of patterns to unlearn, and trust takes time to rebuild. But for the first time in my life, I feel like we're actually moving forward as a family, all of us, with mutual respect and understanding. My wife reminded me yesterday that families aren't perfect, they're messy and complicated, but what matters is the willingness to work through the hard parts together. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm choosing to be hopeful. After all, if these past few months have taught me anything, it's that people can change when they're truly ready to do the work. Update 4. It's been almost 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share where things stand now. Life has settled into a new normal that I never thought possible a year ago. Jack moved out of our spare room 3 months ago after finding a small apartment not far from us. I was nervous when he first brought up the idea, worried that being on his own might trigger a relapse, but he explained that he needed to prove to himself that he could be independent while staying sober. To my relief, he's done exactly that. He's been clean for 8 months now, his longest stretch ever, and recently got promoted to full-time at the garage where he's been working. What's been most remarkable is watching Jack develop healthy coping mechanisms. Instead of turning to substances when things get tough, he calls his sponsor or sometimes even me. Last month, he had a particularly rough therapy session where they discussed some of the worst parts of his abuse. In the past, this would have sent him spiraling, but instead, he came over for dinner and just talked it through. Seeing him process his emotions without self-destructing has been nothing short of transformative. My son has formed a genuine bond with Jack. They've started a weekend tradition where Jack teaches him basic car maintenance. My heart nearly burst when my son announced at dinner last week that he wants to be a mechanic just like Uncle Jack when he grows up. Jack's face when he heard that, I wish I could have captured that moment forever. Liam has been thriving as well. He finally completed his degree and landed a job at an accounting firm. He's also started dating someone, and it's the first relationship where he's been completely open about our family's complicated history. The fact that he feels secure enough to share that part of himself speaks volumes about how far he's come in his own journey. My parents have continued to make efforts to repair our relationship. There have been missteps along the way, old habits die hard, but what's different now is their willingness to acknowledge when they've fallen into old patterns. Last month, they suggested a family therapy session, something they would have dismissed as unnecessary a year ago. We've only had 2 sessions so far, but having a neutral third party help us navigate decades of complex dynamics has been incredibly helpful. I've had my own challenges to work through. Years of being the easy child who didn't make waves left me with deeply ingrained people-pleasing tendencies that I'm still unpacking with my therapist. I'm learning that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. My wife has been my rock through all of this, gently calling me out when I start slipping back into old patterns of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The most significant moment came at our family dinner last weekend. Jack brought up the infamous family tree incident that started this whole journey. Instead of it being a painful memory, we were actually able to laugh about it. My son proudly showed everyone his updated version, where he'd drawn extra thick lines connecting all of us, with a note at the bottom that read "Family is who you choose." Jack got choked up seeing it, And for once, his emotion wasn't followed by anger or withdrawal, just genuine appreciation. We're not a perfect family by any means. There are still days when tensions rise and old wounds threaten to reopen. Jack's sobriety is something we celebrate but never take for granted. My parents sometimes still struggle with giving equal attention to all three of us. Liam occasionally retreats into silence when conflicts arise. And I still find myself swallowing my feelings sometimes to keep the peace. But the difference now is that we talk about these things. We acknowledge our struggles instead of pretending they don't exist. We're learning to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. If you had told me a year ago that we'd be where we are today, I wouldn't have believed you. I was ready to cut ties with half my family before my wedding, convinced that nothing would ever change. I've learned that people can surprise you, not just with their capacity to hurt you, but with their capacity to grow, to heal, and to become better versions of themselves. My wife and I are expecting our second child in the spring. When we shared the news, Jack immediately offered to help set up the nursery, and my parents started talking about adjusting their retirement plans to be more present for their grandchildren. These are small gestures, but they represent a future I couldn't have imagined not long ago, one where our family is whole, not perfect, but genuinely trying. It's been a long, difficult road to get here, and I know there will be more challenges ahead, but for now, I'm grateful for how far we've come and cautiously optimistic about where we're heading. Update 5. It's been a little over a year since my last update, and I'm writing this from the hospital where my wife just gave birth to our daughter. Little Emma came into the world yesterday morning, healthy and beautiful, and watching my son hold his baby sister for the first time is a moment I'll treasure forever. What's made this time especially meaningful is how our entire family has rallied around us. Jack and Liam arrived at the hospital within an hour of my text, loaded down with flowers, balloons, and a teddy bear almost as big as my son. My parents showed up not long after, bringing home-cooked meals for us to have during our stay. There was a time when I couldn't imagine all of us in the same room without tension, let alone sharing such a joyful moment together. Jack has now been sober for nearly 2 years. There have been close calls. A particularly difficult anniversary of his trauma had him calling his sponsor at 3 a.m., and when a co-worker at the garage offered him pills after he injured his back, he admitted to feeling tempted. But he didn't give in. Instead, he reached out for support and worked through it. He's now a sponsor himself, helping others who are just starting their recovery journey. Seeing him find purpose in his pain has been incredible. The most surprising development has been Jack's relationship with my parents. About 6 months ago, they finally had the conversation that was decades overdue. Jack told them that while he appreciated everything they'd done for him, their hovering in constant fear that he would break had actually made his recovery harder. It was a difficult truth for them to hear, but instead of becoming defensive, they really listened. My father even admitted that their overprotectiveness stemmed partly from guilt. They felt they should have known what was happening to Jack and Liam before the adoption, though realistically there was no way they could have. This honest conversation seemed to break down the final wall between them. Now Jack visits them once a week for dinner, completely on his own terms. My mother told me recently that these dinners have helped her see Jack as the adult he is, not the traumatized child who came into their home all those years ago. Liam has news of his own. He proposed to his partner last month. When he asked me to be his best man, I couldn't hold back tears. What touched me even more was that he asked Jack to officiate the ceremony. Jack's response? He immediately signed up for an online ordination course and has been practicing his speech nonstop. Liam joked that by the time the wedding rolls around in the spring, Jack will have rewritten it at least 50 times. The wedding planning has brought Liam and Jack closer than I've ever seen them. They text constantly, and Liam actually goes to Jack for advice now, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Family therapy has continued to be a cornerstone of our healing process. We've had some breakthrough sessions where we've been able to address deeply rooted issues. During one particularly emotional session, Jack finally opened up about how he'd always felt like an outsider in our family, despite everyone's efforts. He admitted that his comment about not being real brothers had more to do with his own feelings of unworthiness than his actual feelings toward me. It was hard to hear, but it helped me understand his perspective in a way I never had before. My relationship with my parents has found a new balance. We've established healthy boundaries, and they've shown remarkable growth in respecting them. I still notice occasional slips into old patterns. Just last week my mother made an offhand comment comparing my parenting to how they handled Jack's issues. But now we can address these moments openly instead of letting resentment build. My son, now 9, has become surprisingly insightful about our family dynamics. When one of his friends asked about his weird family, referring to his uncles who joined the family through adoption, he matter-of-factly explained that families come in all shapes and sizes, and what matters is how people treat each other. Hearing him echo what we've tried to teach him made me realize how much the younger generation can teach us about acceptance. As I sit here in the hospital, watching my wife sleep while holding our newborn daughter, I'm struck by how much has changed. 3 years ago, I was ready to cut ties with half my family over a hurtful comment. Now, that same comment, painful as it was, ultimately became the catalyst for the healing our family desperately needed. Of course, we still have our struggles. Jack's sobriety is something we celebrate one day at a time, knowing the journey isn't always linear. Liam still has moments where he retreats into himself when things get tense. My parents are still learning how to balance their concern without overstepping, and I'm still working on expressing my needs instead of pushing them aside for the sake of harmony. But we're facing these challenges together now, with honesty and compassion. Family therapy has given us the tools to navigate difficult conversations, and we're all committed to the ongoing work it takes to maintain these healthier dynamics. Looking at my daughter's tiny face, I'm filled with hope for the future. She's being born into a family that's far from perfect but is actively choosing to be better every day. And that, I think, is the greatest gift we can give her.